Welcome to Supply Chain Now, the voice of global supply chain. Supply Chain Now focuses on the best in the business for our worldwide audience, the people, the technologies, the best practices, and today's critical issues, the challenges and opportunities. Stay tuned to hear from those making global business happen right here on Supply Chain Now.
Right. Well, this is a really exciting way to wind up the second day of the conference. And unfortunately, Scott and Greg can't be at the conference in person, but we have them here now for a pre-recorded interview. And I'm actually going to be turning the microphone the other way around. So by quick way of introduction, Scott and Greg are the dynamic duo of Supply Chain Now, which started off calling itself a radio station long ago, for those of us young enough or old enough to remember what radios are. And it's evolved into this incredible organization that gives such a huge voice to supply chain professionals, not just in North America, but across the globe. SAPICS has been very, very fortunate to have been able to partner with Scott and Greg on a number of fantastic interviews highlighting leadership in Africa. And if you haven't seen those interviews, you need to see them. We've interviewed people from Nigeria, from South Africa, and each one has just been special in its own right and certainly made me very, very proud of the work that we're doing. I would very much like to ask Scott and Greg to introduce themselves, because I would probably do them a disservice. They're both very modest, Scott probably more than Greg, and they will introduce themselves, and then I'll probably have to uplift and applaud them louder. But Scott, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you stumbled into supply chain management.
I really appreciate that. And most importantly, I appreciate our friendship and relationship and collaboration. Very kind words you shared there. And stumbled is the right word. I'm naturally clumsy, so we do a lot of stumbling. But, I left a great food company, Cisco Foods, and joined a small private manufacturing organization in Columbia, South Carolina, a long time ago. And that was one of my first tastes of what I call end-to-end supply chain. Really enjoyed it. There was a lot that I related back to my time in the Air Force with that mission and that camaraderie, and you pull together to make stuff happen. And that kicked off what's almost been a 20-year journey, either in supply chain or supporting supply chain in some way, shape, or form. Supply chain brought me to Atlanta, where I met my wife, and we've had 3 children and bought our first house, and I've had several startups since. Speaking of startups, we launched our first one in 2013 and sold that a couple years later. And then this little notion of podcasting came to light, and we decided to give that a try in May 2018. And as Greg knows very well, we did 8 podcasts that first year and have done hundreds and hundreds since. And we founded Supply Chain Now in 2019, and it has been off to the races since. So that's a little bit about me. On the personal side, Jenna, you and I enjoy we love gardening, and we love outdoors and animals and flowers, and that's been a great thing to kind of double down on during the pandemic. So Greg.
And you forgot food. Don't forget food.
Oh, right.
And by the way, for those foodies out there really is a thing called supply chain chow, which is something else you need to look out for. But over to you, Greg.
Yeah, well, I started out as a practitioner in supply chain. In fact, you could argue that my very first job, bucking hay bales on my family's farm, was even a supply chain job, though I didn't see it as such then. But I started out in industry, mostly in retail, and then moved into technology, worked with a technology firm that got sold to a larger one, as happens often. Started my own and built that up, and have done a couple of different supply chain technology firms. So what I think is really important to understand about Scott and I is we're practitioners first and talking heads second. And, you know, it really is a passion for us. In fact, I was a guest before I was a partner in this company. I went on with my very small company with a very small voice in the industry and got to share our distinct point of view on what was then Supply Chain Now Radio, and realized the power of that and the power for people to get the word out. And it really leveled the playing field for us when we competed against companies like SAP and Oracle and JDA and whomever else out there, and saw the power of it. And then you know, we just have continued to give that voice to people who have such a powerful statement to make in the industry, like you, of course. And thank you, by the way, for letting us talk to your group. We've had a great relationship with SAPICS. Love what you guys are doing. I mean, it really is, it's inspiring to see the reach that you have across Africa and the reach that you've given us to be able to learn so much from the people of Africa, who in a lot of ways are advancing well more rapidly than a lot of the world. So it's been fun. And of course, it's always great talking to you, finding out what's going down in SA.
And I think that, you know, what does come through very, very, very loudly is exactly that. You are practitioners and you have got your hands dirty and you have done the hard graft. And like you say, you're not just talking heads, and discussions with your guests. You know, you've got an innate ability to absolutely understand what it is they're talking about. And some of the guests that you've had on the various podcast shows, interviews, whatever, I don't think there's ever been one that I haven't come away thinking about one nugget that they've said. I mean, there was Sherika Sanders, I think, who talked about, I mean, what an incredible person with such intelligence, and just, you know, how often do you meet somebody who writes software for spaceships and things, and who can
verify that supply chain is not rocket science because she's actually a rocket scientist.
A rocket scientist, exactly.
Right.
And you know, and just that relating supply chain management to everything that we do and everything that we are. And Scott said it the other day when we were talking about how far supply chain now has evolved into so many different things, like your dial P for procurement and your tequila sunrise and the various different, you've now got a session that's in Spanish for Spanish speaking supply chain professionals. We'll have to definitely get some Zulu and some other
Afrikaans. We're looking for an Afrikaans series.
We can do some Swahili probably.
But, you know, kidding aside, I think that's been one of the wonderful learnings that come out of our work, you know, with you and on that, you know, supply chain leadership across Africa. You know, there's 54 different countries across the continent. That is one of the hot spots for innovation and entrepreneurism and new ideas and talent
and technological challenges.
Yes. And I think, you know, part of, you know, of this message and of what we're amplifying, I think that's a very important message that can't get lost in the shuffle, right? I think just like the States, you know, Greg, you've said this 1,000 times, because a lot of times I think on coming here in the States, when folks think of the U.S., they may think of that, you know, 50 states that are all just alike, but there is also tons of differences between each of those 50 states. So, you know, lots of parallels around the world that continues to get smaller and smaller. That's been a big, wonderful thing to see as well.
Yeah, so I've mentioned a couple of my sort of standout sessions, and I've loved the ones that we've done, where we've brought you some of the incredible talent and expertise that exists, and there's a lot more where that all came from. And being able to highlight partnerships with organizations like People That Deliver, who are doing, making supply chain, people understand that supply chain is so important because it does actually save lives at the end of the day. Being able to give a voice to all these different people who are involved in supply chain management has been definitely the highlight of this ghastly 18 months of COVID lockdown in and out. What putting you on the spot now, Greg, what would you say one of your real highlight interviews, apart from ours, of course, of your highlight of interview that has really kind of kept you thinking?
You know, I always think about this, and there are too many to mention, but as long as we're on the topic of Africa, no product, no program. Speaking of our friends at People That Deliver, right? I think that says it in a nutshell, in that, you know, if you think about all these memes and whatnot that are going around, you've got one job, right? Get the product to the people that need it, right? In a way that is sustainable, not just fiscally sustainable, but physically and environmentally sustainable. And man, if that doesn't break it down into its most basic component, that I don't know what does. And that was just such an impactful statement. There are so many, but I know at least one that Scott might come up with, and I don't want to take it away from him. So I'm going to see if he comes up with it.
Oh man, this is one of my favorite questions, and because the best part of what we get to do is sit and learn from and hear from leaders across the world doing big things. And so a lot of these folks don't have the chance to be interviewed and share their message, their story, and the journey. Right. That was a wonderful one. That no product, no program is wonderful. I think of Sandra McQuillan, right? One of our favorite leaders. Her last time with us, she spent 1 hour and 15 minutes truly giving a master class, not just in supply chain management, but leadership. Right. And one of the great quotes there, she says, quote, "You can be as technically brilliant as you can be, but if you can't make it work with other people, what's the point?" And that's just a small example of her brilliance. Dr. Sherika Sanders,
right?
When asked, how do you get ahead and how do you advance and how do you break in and how you do big things? She said, do the work. Do the work. It was a mantra throughout that conversation, right? And of course, that powerful testimony that she gave of her work on the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster. And she didn't, as she was diving into root cause and the countermeasure of what prevents that from happening again, right, it didn't dawn on her the massive importance of her mission, of her work, until she got a standing ovation and folks were crying because she was going to save people's lives with her work. And then finally, both of y'all remember this one. This has been a more recent one. Nikki Scott with the Commercial Transport Academy. She's conveying the story of a conversation she's having with an organizational leader. They're struggling with hiring women, and some of what she heard was, well, from this her male counterpart is, what if they get pregnant? And she calls time out and says, "Dude, really?" And that was such a wonderful aspect of that interview. But we all should have more "dude, really" moments, right? You call time out and you really question what we've just heard or what's just been said. So I love Nikki's no nonsense take in that episode.
Yeah, really, really very, very good and fantastic examples of really and the diversity of the conversation too, and all of it actually stemming from people's passion for supply chain management, which is something that never ever ceases to amaze me.
That's a really good point, Jenny. I mean, we've all been in supply chain for a long time, more than 2 decades is all I'll confess to. I'm trying to get people throughout supply chain to pretend like it didn't exist more than 2 decades ago, so we can still feel young. But the truth is, because we've been in supply chain, we really take this craft and its impact for granted, and we have long been longing for the impact, for the recognition of the impact that supply chain has. And it's only recently that the world has experienced and recognized this. And it seems like old hat for us. And we're all sitting around going, yeah, where have you been for the last 40 years, 20 plus years? But now that people do recognize it, it's a double-edged sword. It's both a huge opportunity to get that seat at the table, which more and more is happening, but it's also an exposure point, because one of the things that we've seen as supply chain has come to the fore of business is we get as much pressure now from annual reports and stock shareholder meetings and that sort of thing as the salespeople do, right? So now we have gotten what we've asked for, and now we have to perform at the level that salespeople have long had to perform at, and no excuses are accepted anymore in this industry. So we have to really change rapidly from the downtrodden to the leadership of the organization. And I've seen organizations around the world who have put supply chain at the forefront long before now, and actually have driven that strong performance culture into other aspects of their business, including sales. So it's a huge opportunity, and at the same time, it's a huge obligation for us as members of the industry.
Yeah, it is. It's a classic case of careful what you wish for. Sometimes,
exactly right. Well said. That's exactly right.
And I think something that really has struck home quite recently is in the UK, what are they calling it? The Pingate saga, with the people who are part of or who make up the supply chain, who, because they have to self-isolate, they can't be there. And so for the first time, really, in a lot of people's memories, shelves are not being as well stocked as normal. But it's that reminder that people are so important a part of all the best supply chains in the world. And we can have some of the best automation, but without the right people, it's something that really we don't ever want to have to find out about. And that's why the whole upskilling and supply chain knowledge is just so important to share all the time. And I'm a great believer that education is not all about textbooks. It's about discussion. It's about learning from people. And I think that just that reminder that people are the important links in the supply chain.
100%, and forever the important link. I mean, let's face it, even automation is designed and built by scientists who are people. They may not seem like it all the time, but they're really, really smart people. And at the same time, I think we're going to see supply chain evolve from what we've experienced. And I've only seen this in the last several months, but there are these 3 Ds tied to supply chain that have kept people out of supply chain for a lot of years: dark, dirty, and dangerous. And what we have to think about is that those are the jobs that will be automated. They will be the dark, dirty, and dangerous. And those are the jobs that should be automated to elevate people to what they're really good at. So it will become less a physical job, though we'll always have physical people doing some aspect of the business, but less of the dangerous. And that's important, less of the mundane. And I think that's satisfying. And then less of the physical aspects that can be done by technology, so that we can elevate people to use their true gifts. We are a lot more adaptable than technology can be, because technology requires so much data to be adaptable. AI, for instance, takes a lot of data. And guess where the knowledge for AI comes from? People. So, there's a big transition coming that will change the role of humans in the supply chain, but it's always going to be there.
Yeah, for sure. And Scott, what do you think one of the biggest challenges for modern day supply chain management or supply chains is?
Yeah, what to finish
that was a really badly constructed sentence, but anyway, you know what I mean.
You're among friends.
I get
We've done it to you too, Jenny.
So before I get to, I think one of the biggest challenges, I just want to echo, there cannot be enough recognition for what people are doing to drive not just global supply chain, but global business forward, pandemic or no pandemic. And I think I love seeing the newfound recognition there. And I think, Greg said the 3 Ds. I think it's about 3 Ps. The future's all about people, people, people. And, Dr. Mainsa with IBM, of course, a world leader in technology, talked about, how do you innovate? You innovate with people, and that is that cannot be, that simple thought cannot be lost in the minds of leadership. So the biggest challenges, and unfortunately or excitingly, kind of depend on what your capacity is and taste is for challenge. There's no shortage of challenges in the world of supply chain, right? But I think in the bigger picture, I think one of the greatest challenges on the short list is here in the information era, the current era, customer expectations and demands are off the chart, right? Long gone are the days of wait 4 to 6 weeks for delivery. I mean, that's try saying that to your
remember
kids.
that.
So they have this highly elusive balance that supply chain leaders are chasing after. On one hand, they've got to find a way for the organization itself to meet and surpass those demands, right? Delivery, price, quality, you name it. But then on the other side, we have to solve this and continue to make strides in terms of sustainability, right? And the circular economy, and challenge and addressing in a very meaningful way many other challenges of our time. If you've heard any of our live streams, the topic of human trafficking and human slavery and the role, rightfully so, that supply chain leaders have in identifying, spotlighting, and rectifying what goes on in that with those challenges in these global supply chains. So the balance is massive, but it's a noble one, and it's the right one with the right leadership here today. We gotta make things happen, and that's where supply chain. That's what supply chain does, right? Supply chain makes it happen.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, Greg, you talked about people, but what else? Technology is one of your passions, and from a challenge or opportunity perspective, what do you see as being the key catalyst in the next, in the next years?
Yeah, I think the key catalyst has already begun to happen, and that is the mass exodus of baby boomers out of the supply chain industry, and the knowledge that is leaving with them. If you think about when our parents were introduced to supply chain or participated in supply chain or first started, there wasn't all this data capture. It was all on paper, right? And a lot of it is right here. I sold technology into this industry for, as I said, more than 2 decades. And I've seen it firsthand, and I have watched it happen. I used to joke about when I was implementing technology we taught in the early days of my participation in technology. There were the complainers in the back of the room. There were the excited people in the front of the room, and there was always somebody in the middle of the room who was going to retire rather than adapt. And I always felt like that loss of human knowledge and human capital was tragic, and now it's happening at a really increasing rate, and we need to capture that knowledge, because that is precisely what we need to impart to AI. I think about, and I often say that AI, it's not an overlord, it's a child. It's a child that needs to be taught what we know about supply chain and and then it can interpret that. And all it is it's a human mind that never forgets, never uses emotion, right? Never misses a step. That's all it is. And it's a great vehicle for imparting knowledge and then utilizing that to increase the consistency and pace with which we do things. So the capture of people's knowledge is a really, really critical catalyst, and we're missing it, frankly. We need to embrace that a whole lot more. And at the same time, we need to introduce mechanisms that eliminate bias, because look, let's face it, our perception is based on our reality, not reality. And so we need to mitigate that with some other tools, but that's possible to do. But I would say that's the number one catalyst, along with, as we talked about earlier, Jenny, this notion that we have to be better, we have to be faster, we have to be cheaper, and we have to be stronger, right? We talk about resilience all the time, and technology is the way to do that. Obviously, humans will always participate, but that consistency and that speed and that cost analysis, right? Combinatorial analytics, sorry. Combinatorial analytics is a key part of what we do, and that is a lot of inputs, considering a lot of scenarios to produce a lot of options, and then culling that down to the one or the few that are the most effective. And then, of course, the understanding of, well, what if something goes wrong, right? What if X goes wrong? What if Y goes wrong? What if Z goes wrong? And planning for that. That's a critical part of technology, and that's something that we need to capture and utilize technology for. So isn't it wild that we keep coming back to that human factor, right? That is really the catalyst, in my opinion, for technology.
Yeah, and I think it's that very interesting conversation with the younger, with my children, and that whole thing about how, if we automate, then there aren't going to be jobs, and their immediate answer is yes, there are always going to be jobs, because somebody needs to know how to create that technology.
That's
Somebody
right.
knows how to fix that technology, etc., etc. And I do think that kind of the next generation has got a much wiser head on their shoulders, perhaps, than or less hysterical, perhaps. I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, at the same time, the generation that's leaving the workforce, one of the largest generations in the history of mankind, is leaving the workforce. There aren't enough people who want to do the jobs. It's not that they're not able. They don't want to do the jobs that those people have done, the dark, dirty, and dangerous, right?
Right.
They don't want to be away from home for 2 weeks at a time driving a truck. Therefore, autonomous vehicles are inevitable. The safety issues also are a great catalyst for that as well. We have people who are hyped up on substances to try and meet the incredible demands that are placed on them, unfair demands that are placed on them. So, and fewer people want to do that. So it is true that it won't be taking anyone's job. In fact, we know there are not enough drivers in the world to ever catch up with the demand of transportation these days. So it's inevitable, and it's not going to take people's jobs. What it's going to do is elevate, upskill, as you said before. It's going to elevate humans' participation to what Scott was talking about is, and both of you really have talked about, is that innovative mindset. I've always admired Scott for his military service and admired military people in general. They have to make life and death decisions instantaneously with too little data. Now, technology can't do that. Only human beings can do that. And that is the role that we will play, is when, and it inevitably happens, when there's an exception or an outlier that the technology cannot process, human beings will interpret it and process it. And that will always be the case with exceptions and outliers. So that's what we're best equipped for and most satisfied in doing, right? Yeah. It's the most satisfying to us as humans to do. Yeah. Sorry, I'm kind of ranting here, but I've had family who have worked in factories and on farms, and they did not relish getting up every day to grind it out in the fields, digging a hole to fix the fence, or chasing down the horses, or riding all day long on a tractor, right? A tractor, which, by the way, goes straight down, turns around, and comes straight back. So I think when you think about it from that standpoint, it's a great opportunity for humankind to elevate our satisfaction and to utilize our knowledge.
Yeah, for sure. And going back to your point about work changing and life changing and people not wanting to do certain jobs, I think that the last 18 months has also highlighted this probably sooner than would have happened, because we're all learning that actually working from home is doable. Yeah. Having international meetings is doable without having to travel all the way to the other side of the world. Sometimes it's not the same, but it is doable. And certain elements, the world hasn't stopped. It has carried on because we've embraced technology and because people have been prepared to put up with different standards, I guess, working from a kitchen table actually has its benefits sometimes.
Right.
And I think that
Closer to the
all of
fridge.
that, much closer. Yeah, that's the downside. But people have realized a different quality of life, and some love it, some don't. And I think that it's going to be so interesting to see what kind of happens going forwards. But to that point, it's so easy to be negative and to concentrate on. You've got to take more water with it, Greg, to understand just exactly what positives have come out of this time. The negatives are so easy to find, and I started this whole thing, and I know everybody else has, but it's that COVID silver lining, and it does exist, and there are things that I'm not sure my son would agree, but he came home for Christmas from studying overseas, and he's still here because he can't get back. Well, that's my COVID silver lining. And so, but professionally, I think it's also seeing how my team, whom I'm immensely proud of, because half of them are working from home all the time. The other half sort of come into the office and come and go, and we've still kept things going. And in fact, I think we've given better offerings to our members than we were before, because we've had to work that little bit harder, be that bit more creative. And they've done an amazing job. So to you, Scott, what is your COVID silver lining? What has been your positive from all of this? And you can have more than one thing. Let's do this in a positive way.
Well, believe it or not, there's lots of that makes up that silver lining if you go looking for it. We're big believers in celebrating good news here at Supply Chain Now. It's powerful to share. It's powerful to hear, and it's uplifting and energizing. I think of the superpowers when I think of some of the good news and silver linings to the pandemic. The power of empathy, the power of maintaining a sense of humor. Imagine that. Just like as we all got a good laugh out of Greg sipping more than he could handle right there in the moment. It's important to laugh and the power of showing your humanity. That's okay, and it's okay to lean into that. And the power of real, meaningful relationships, that certainly in supply chain has manifested itself, and it's really had people taking note of that, right? Because as whomever said it on one of our episodes, you can't find new friends fast enough right now, right? I think the other thing, y'all both were speaking about the kids of the kids, right? The kids of the pandemic age, whether they're in college or high school, or if you're like, our family, we've got, 3 still in elementary and middle school. And, when I think of the silver lining there is that the kids are okay. The kids are more than okay. They're exceptional. They're extraordinary. They've been able to tackle all of what goes with childhood and that journey and all the difficult things, and have had a pandemic drop on top of it all. And they have thrived, and they've continued to persevere and be the leaders that they are at these incredible ages. And if that doesn't inspire you that there are very bright things ahead from very capable people that can fill in the seats that Greg has spoken to, you better check your pulse. So that's some things that has me jumping out of bed in the mornings. And great partnerships, the power of great partnerships, as well as illustrated right here, is certainly positive as well.
Yeah. And Greg, do you want to finish off on your COVID silver linings?
Yeah, there are many, and not necessarily supply chain oriented. I mean, I spent 4 months at home with all 3 of my adult daughters, which is a rare opportunity. And, I think back to the original days of doing phone calls while we were all walking our animals, a couple miles a day, and getting to spend tremendous amount of time and watching them work, and experiencing that. But in addition, I think what I see as the power is the power of a collection of individuals, wherever they're from or wherever they are, and the power that they can produce, and the power that individuals can produce, not only without the aid of, but sometimes in spite of the assistance, if that's what you want to call it, of government and officials and experts, and just the wherewithal of human beings generally, and the power that we give to one another as individuals, right? I mean, certainly we're all under different governments. Scott's in a different county than I am. You're in a different country than we are. We're all under different influences and information sources and those sorts of things. But when we come together, when we experience one another as humans, it's very, very powerful. And it's a unfiltered look at how the world really works. Whereas in the past, we got a very measured perspective on how the world works and what the realities of the world were. Now, let me just acknowledge real quickly, I studied Soviet politics in college, so I come at it from that lens. But I think it's really powerful what we can do together, what we can do even just virtually together, and what we can share with one another that uplifts and enlightens one another.
So doesn't that give me my perfect opportunity to do my hashtag team, that together everyone achieves more? Thank you.
There we go.
But it's also the power of community, and that's really what this conference is about, has been for 43 years, is the bringing together of a community of like-minded individuals who are actually all working together at the end of the day,
right,
to get the right product to the right people in the right condition, and that's ultimately what it is. And it's people pulling together to be able to make it happen and to keep the world turning. So on that note, I'd like to ask Scott to close us off.
All right, so Jenny, I really appreciate that. I really enjoyed this last hour, but it's important for you to know that our entire team are big parts of the worldwide Jenny Froome fan club. I mean, we love, it's deeds, not words with you. And that's what the world needs, whether you're in supply chain or anywhere else. So really appreciate your partnership and your leadership. But as Greg's about to count down, folks, if you're at this SAPICS conference, hope you have a wonderful time. But when you leave this conference, we challenge you like we challenge everyone else every single day. Hey, do good, give forward, be the change that's needed. And on that note, we'll see you next time right here, hopefully at Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for being a part of our Supply Chain Now community. Check out all of our programming at supplychainnow.com, and make sure you subscribe to Supply Chain Now anywhere you listen to podcasts. And follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. See you next time on Supply Chain Now.